Today I'd like to provide a summary of Euthyphro, a dialogue that was written by Plato. Now, Plato was a Greek philosopher and probably one of the two most important philosophers of all time. Plato was a student of Socrates, and this particular dialogue that Plato wrote is about the beginning of the end, so to speak, for his teacher. Now, what's interesting about Plato is that when he wrote, he didn't just write out his ideas. He didn't write philosophical textbooks. Instead, he wrote dialogues. He wrote conversations between people. And through, oftentimes, using his teacher as a mouthpiece, Socrates, through the questioning method, right, that Socratic method of his teacher, he would attempt to arrive at some true ideas, or at least leave the reader with a whole lot to think about at the end. Now, Euthyphro is, as I mentioned, the beginning of the end for Socrates. This was written in the 4th century BC, and Socrates has received notice that he is being charged with specific crimes and could possibly face death for them. He's being charged of two crimes. First, corruption of the youth. Corruption of the youth. So it was believed that Socrates was teaching the youth of the day and leading them astray. Socrates was a very popular teacher, and so there were a lot of young men, young philosophers that wanted to learn under him. And so one of the charges was that he was corrupting the youth. And then the other charge was that he was introducing foreign gods. He didn't accept the gods of the Greeks, but instead introduced his own gods, and thus was leading people astray religiously. And so that's the position we find Socrates in at the beginning of this dialogue. Now, this is a great dialogue to read if you perhaps haven't run into many of Plato's works in the past. Some of this philosophy stuff can be difficult to work through, yet I think Euthyphro is a readable, understandable dialogue by Plato that covers a lot of important themes and ideas. And what's really helpful about it is that you only have two people in dialogue here, unlike some of Plato's other writings that involve multiple characters and multiple ideas being introduced over a short period of time. And so Socrates runs into Euthyphro. And Euthyphro and Socrates start kind of exchanging, background information. Socrates lets him know of the charges that he's facing. And then he says, Euthyphro, what are you doing here? What's going on? What kind of legal issues do you have going on? And he says, well, actually, I'm not facing any charges or anything. I'm actually bringing charges against someone. Socrates says, who? What's going on? And he says, well, actually, I'm bringing charges against my father. And Plato, or Socrates rather, couldn't believe it. What do you mean you're bringing charges against your father? It must be a very serious crime. And Euthyphro says, yeah, it is. It's murder. And Socrates immediately says, oh no, well, what did he do? Who did he kill? It must have been a family member if you're bringing charges against your father. And Euthyphro says, no, it's interesting that you assume it must be a family member of mine. It wasn't a family member of mine. It was rather someone I had hired for help. And, in fact, this person who I had hired for help actually killed one of our servants by slitting his throat. And so Socrates, obviously, like many other people that had run into Euthyphro, is questioning this kind of logic. And Euthyphro says, yes, I know, my family thinks I'm crazy. How dare I bring charges of murder against my father? Because what his father did, what Euthyphro's father did was, in order to investigate the situation, tied up the hired help who had killed the servant, threw him in a ditch, and then just kind of left him be while he was supposed to be investigating. And so the man dies of dehydration and hunger. And so Euthyphro says, the fact that the man had previously killed a servant, or that the man was no relative of mine, is irrelevant to this situation. What my father did is wrong. And he says, it goes against the divine law. And Socrates is intrigued by this, and he says, well, in order for you to be bringing these charges against your father, you must be really sure of what is holy. You must be really sure of what is right and what is wrong. Otherwise, you wouldn't have risked it. And Euthyphro says, yeah, I know what is holy. And Socrates says, well, teach me. I want to be your student. And this is oftentimes the attitude that Socrates takes, right? We get the impression that Socrates is making himself out to be the student when in fact he is being the teacher. And so Socrates asks him, well, what is holy? Well, how do we know what is holy? And Euthyphro says, well, what I'm doing right now, right? Bringing charges against my father for murder. It would be wrong of me not to do this. And it is the holy thing for me to do this. And Socrates says, no, but you see, what you're doing is you're giving me an example of what is holy. But you're not telling me what is this divine principle which allows you to make these decisions, such big decisions like bringing charges against your father. And then Euthyphro replies and says, well, what is holy is what is agreeable to the gods. What is agreeable to the gods. What the gods believe is holy. And Socrates says, you see, this is why I get into trouble. Because people expect me to just accept these answers about these gods, and they just don't make a whole lot of sense to me. And so Socrates says, well, you see, there seems to be two problems with this. Problem number one, the gods themselves don't agree. And I'm sure that you're familiar with this kind of idea. If you've read the Odyssey or any of the other kind of ancient Greek writings that interacts with the gods, oftentimes the gods are warring against each other. Right? You have Athena and you have Poseidon with different goals in mind, and they're kind of battling each other to see who's going to win. So how can we say that what is holy is what's agreeable to the gods if the gods themselves can't agree on what they want? And so Euthyphro adjusts his definition a little bit. He's like, yeah, well, it's what's agreeable to all the gods. And at this point, Socrates seems to think this causes another problem. To say, well, it's what's agreeable to all the gods. Not just what's agreeable to some, but what's agreeable to all. And it's a problem of knowledge, right? How can we know what all of the gods approve of? What all of the gods find agreeable? But he says, I'm just going to let that pass for now. Right? And then he introduces the second problem that he really finds with attaching the holiness to what the gods find to be agreeable. He says, is the holy approved by the gods because it is holy, or is it holy because it is approved? And this is what's known as the Euthyphro dilemma. And he's saying, okay, so when you say that the holy is that which is approved by the gods, do the gods approve of it because it is holy? Or do they approve of it and therefore it becomes holy, right? Is it that it becomes holy because the gods have approved of it? And so Euthyphro says, well, it's because it's holy, right? The gods approve of it because it's holy. And Socrates says, but don't you see then? There's a distinction, right? There's a distinction between what is holy and what is what is the will of the gods, right? Or what the gods approve of. Because if the thing is holy already, and then the gods approve of it, then what is holy is distinct from the approval of the gods. So there needs to be some other explanation for what is holy. Now, Euthyphro didn't want to take the other side of the dilemma, because then what is holy, right? If it's only holy because it's approved by the gods, then you have some kind of arbitrary morality, right? Where anything that the gods may like or not like, that could even change, so there's an instability to it. So Euthyphro knows there's all kinds of problems with the idea that something becomes holy, because then what is holy can always be changing. So Socrates decides to help Euthyphro out here. He says, let me help you a little bit. Maybe it's that everything that is holy is just. And Euthyphro says, you know what, that sounds good. I think you're right. That sounds accurate to me. What is holy is just. And then Socrates says that, yeah, but then we have to ask the question, what species of the just is holiness? And Euthyphro says, well, it is that which looks after the gods. And Socrates has a hard time figuring this out. He's like, what do you mean that which looks after the gods? Are you suggesting that the gods increase in holiness? And like a parent looks after a child or something like that. And he says, no. It's more like a slave to a master. A slave to a master. And what he means by that is it's something that helps the gods accomplish their purpose, right? So it's the thing that helps. So Socrates says, okay, so you're saying it's the thing that looks after, in that it helps a particular person accomplish something. So the person or thing that looks after a farmer helps them accomplish growing crops, tending to the cows, that sort of thing. And Euthyphro says yes. And then he says, well, but then what is the goal? Right? What is the goal of the gods? And Euthyphro says, well, holiness helps us to sort out what it is that pleases the gods, what is agreeable to the gods, what is gratifying to the gods. So it's not that the gods need anything, but they receive gratification from this process. So Socrates says, okay, so holiness then is the science of the requests and donations to the gods, sacrifices and prayers. He's like, I get what humans get out of this relationship. But what is it that the gods get? And again, Euthyphro reemphasizes, it's gratification. That is what the gods are receiving. And he says, so then holiness isn't the science of donations and requests of the gods, but rather it's what pleases the gods. Right? It's what's agreeable to the gods. And Euthyphro says, yes, that is correct. It is what is agreeable to the gods. And Socrates says, don't you see? We've come full circle. Your original answer to me, it was that what is holy is agreeable to the gods. What is holy is what is agreeable to the gods. And we already discussed the problem that leads to. Again, the gods don't agree. And two, the Euthyphro dilemma, right? The dilemma that Socrates puts to Euthyphro, is something holy because the gods approved of it, or is it approved because it is holy? And so that is where this dialogue actually ends. And it leaves us with lots of questions about the relationship of holiness with the divine. right? Does the divine identify what is holy because it is holy? Or is the divine just constantly making things holy? And Plato and Euthyphro do find issue with both of those options. And so what is the relationship between God or the gods and what is good? That is the major question that Socrates raises and that Plato provides us some ideas to think about in this dialogue. Now, in a future video, I'm going to actually specifically spend some time discussing the Euthyphro dilemma. But I want to encourage you, pick up and read. Read Plato's dialogue, Euthyphro. I think it will be an enriching time. I think it will be a time that challenges you. And I hope that this summary was helpful in kind of giving you the ideas and the themes so that you don't feel like you're walking in blind to a kind of reading that perhaps you're not too used to. If this was helpful, please let me know down below. If you've read Plato's dialogue, Euthyphro, what are your thoughts about it? What are some of the questions that this dialogue raised for you? And how do you handle the Euthyphro dilemma? Alright guys, well thank you for listening. I hope that you'll subscribe for more videos like this and many others that deal with a number of these issues regarding religion and morality and those sorts of things. Until next time.